Hello everyone, it is another day in this The Clown Decade, yada yada yada, let's just get into it. This, for those of you who don't know, is a series where I am reacting to Politics Joe doing vox pops in certain areas of Britain, asking the local people about issues that somehow relate to the area they've gone to. This week they have gone to the richest place in the UK and asked the local people if they should be paying more tax. What exactly is extreme about any part of this topic, I'm not entirely sure, unless there are people that are saying that there should be 100% inheritance tax, but I guess we'll have to wait and see. So take it away, Politics Joe.
Wealth, more often than not, is a result of people's savings.
Yep, that is absolutely true. It's something like 70% of millionaires in the UK are self-made these days. It is absolutely true that most people who are within even the economic elite, but certainly within the new elite, are from new money. It's actually ironically within the new elite, they're kids that are getting what is now old money, I suppose we can call it, because it's money that has been made in the last century. You know, we're 24 years into this current century. I think we can call money made in the 70s and 80s old money at this point. But either way, just because you can afford to live in London, I don't think means that you should pay more tax. At least proportionally necessarily. I'm not against a flat tax rate, but the obsession with, ironically, people who can afford to live in London is to tax the quote-unquote super rich, when the reality of the situation is that if you are able to afford to live in London and you don't have a council house, odds are you are within the top 10% of incomes of the country.
It just seems wrong to take that away from them.
And this elderly gentleman, he kind of misses the main point, which is that money in your savings has already been taxed. And so he thinks it's wrong to tax it again, which I think's a perfectly valid point.
I would say I've got a very good standard of living, but I'm still very happy to help those less fortunate.
Well, with this particular woman, I don't know if she means I'm happy to pay more tax to help the poor, or I'm happy to give to charity to help the poor. Because if it's the former there, then you can actually write to HMRC with a cheque saying, I would like this millions of pounds to go towards council houses or something like that. You can actually do that. You can voluntarily make a donation to HMRC. Yet typically people who are given the offer on the street when there are vox pops, especially from right-wing people saying, do you think you should pay more tax? And they say yes. When they are given the laptop to voluntarily donate to HMRC, they say, oh, no, I can't do that. Because that's the thing with most people. They actually just want more of other people's money to go away. They don't want their own to go away. Hence, to some degree, no matter where you are, what social class you are, you will try and find some loophole to get through so you can pay less tax. Why do you think most cleaners and gardeners only accept cash?
Like the tax on, there's going to be a tax on £80,000 and more, which is, for London, with how high rent is at the moment, I think it's like, that's like, I mean, not livable, but like, it's you know, it's not a lot of money.
Now, that guy was a bit all over the place, but I think £80,000 should be seen as a middling income. There are people in the UK that think that £30,000 as a annual salary is rich. That means you're a rich person. And in all fairness, in a worldwide standard, it probably is rich. But for a first world country, that should be seen as almost an entry-level job. And slowly but surely, minimum wage is raising the bar to that standard, but minimum wage is a different issue. But I agree with this guy's point. If you're on a single income of £80,000, you should probably be able to live pretty comfortably, even in London. But from people I know who live in London, you pretty much always need to find a place with a room or flatmate, and your average combined income of a two-bedroom flat is probably somewhere in the region of £100,000, and I'm not even joking about that. So yes, raising taxes on what is practically a middling income is just going to mean that people who are paying their own way within London are probably going to have to move out.
Despite Labour's general reticence to promise anything in particular for their plans in government.
I'll be honest with you, I don't know why Politics Joe is saying this. These are journalists. They should know that all they have to do is Google the draft Labour manifesto and they will see exactly what is being promised. And they have a bunch of reforms to the tax system, including end tax breaks for private equity bosses, remove the non-don tax loophole, putting in place a system for generally temporary residents. And the thing with that is that, okay, you close that loophole, you probably make an extra few million a year. It's really not worth closing. Remove the tax loophole that private schools enjoy. Absolutely crazy in my mind. I don't know why you would be taxing an educational institution. Crack down on tax evasion and tax avoidance. Well, that's just flim-flam, every government says that. Scrap and replace the current system of business rates in England and Wales with a fully cost and funded system of business property taxation. So they actually do have plans with the tax system, and effectively it's just, if you're making a lot of money, we'll tax you more in other ways than just income. And you'll probably see a much worse education sector for that, along with, depending how that business property taxation is going to go, an even worse high street. This is part of the reason I say just to vote reform, if nothing else, next election, because at least all they're basically saying is, yes, we will lower taxes. How's that being costed? Well, they're going to cut a lot of spending.
There is one thing they are clear on. There will be no new tax on wealth. This is despite research suggesting that a wealth tax on just the richest 0.3% of the population could generate £10 billion for the public purse.
Ah yes, research from the Trades Union Congress. Yes, I'm not particularly surprised that trade unions, and especially ones that are demanding a £15 an hour minimum wage, have managed to calculate that they can get 10 billion if they just put a wealth tax on. I mean, just saying source TUC is not particularly useful. You need the source to say what study this was. But anyway, I managed to find it on The Guardian, because this is what investigative journalism entails. But according to the TUC, a modest wealth tax on the richest 140,000 people in the UK could raise more than 10 billion to help pay for public services, according to the Trades Union Congress, which has called for a national conversation about taxing wealth. Research commissioned by the union umbrella body found that a one-off wealth tax of 1.7% on those with assets above £3 million, rising to 3.5% for those with more than 10 million, could deliver a 10.4 billion boost to the public purse. So there's already quite a lot of issues with this. For a start, wealth isn't just a load of money in a bank account. That is never what wealth is. What wealth is liquid assets. It's how much does this wealthy person currently own in terms of stocks, shares, and physical assets such as houses, and how much would they make if they sold them at market value overnight. That's effectively how wealth is determined. And for some reason what the TUC think is that if they simply tax what all that is worth, then therefore we can make £10 billion. Well, what's going to end up happening to make that tax money is that these people are going to have to sell their liquid assets, or the government is going to have to seize them. And at that point, you don't have a tax system, you just have a socialist government that is trying to take away the rich's toys, if you want to put it that way. Or in reality, most of the time it's stocks and shares within businesses that keep them running, that keep supermarkets running, that actually end up making food cheaper for everyone else. Not out of any sort of altruism, but yes, because it makes these people money. But not only that, you're also assuming that they're going to be willing to pay this rather than just, move, because no doubt most of these people will be moving abroad internationally constantly to make that type of money. And not only that, if you're doing all that just to make £10 billion off a one-off payment. And also, just for reference, I want to make it clear, if you got this 10 billion off the wealthy, it would fund the NHS for approximately 21 days. And even that's an overestimation, so well done. You want to tax the rich of their liquid assets and not protect property rights here, all to fund the NHS for under a month. Congratulations, what a stupid decision.
While a wealth tax would affect very few Brits, the people it would are likely to be living here, in Kensington, the richest parliamentary constituency in the country.
Yep, that makes sense that it would be a constituency in London. Also happens to be part of where Made in Chelsea is filmed, so, yeah, I'm not shocked that all of these very, very rich people who have come through on money from their parents happen to all live right next to where the richest constituency is. And some of them probably earn it, to be honest. I don't know. I've never watched Made in Chelsea. Point being, yes, I'm not surprised that it's in London. I'm also not particularly surprised that you're not seeing an awful lot of diversity here.
Kensington is a pretty complicated place. Some people here are loaded. There's the most expensive street in the country, Phillimore Gardens, where the average house costs £23.8 million.
Honestly, I'm kind of surprised that it's that low. I was expecting at least £50 million for your average house there.
But among the 6th-floor townhouses and supercars, there is serious deprivation.
Interesting. Let's see what is meant by deprivation here.
Research shows that from 2019 to 2020, 1 in 4 children in Kensington and Chelsea were living in poverty.
From what I can tell, this is actually true, as the key indication points for diversity and inequality show us. 47% of Kensington and Chelsea residents are from BAME backgrounds, compared with just 17% for England overall. 48% of Kensington and Chelsea residents were born abroad, which coincidentally also coincides with the average amount of people in London who are born abroad and taking up social housing in London. More than 1 in 5 Kensington and Chelsea neighbourhoods are among the 20% most income deprived at a national level, which I have to say does in some ways surprise me, because how can you afford to live in one of the richest constituencies in the UK if you're within the bottom 20% of income deprived areas? The main answer to that, I think, is council housing. 1 in 4 children in Kensington and Chelsea lived in poverty in 2019 to 2020. I've looked through this entire report, by the way, and I cannot find if that means average or relative poverty, I should say, or absolute poverty. Based off that number, I'm going to guess that it is relative poverty, which again is based off having a household income that is 60% of the median. For reference, that is having a household income of over £20,000. Under £20,000 and you're in relative poverty. Grenfell has highlighted the levels of deprivation, and now the COVID-19 pandemic has deepened the inequalities within the borough. In particular, the economic impact of lockdowns and social restrictions have meant many struggling to make ends meet, put food on the table and heat their homes. So it appears this report is mainly blaming the lockdown and the fact that people couldn't work during lockdown as to why poverty has got so bad in the area. So yes, this inequality isn't necessarily to do with the fact that there are rich people there exploiting the poor there. It's to do with the fact that lockdown happened.
And Grenfell Tower serves as a brutal reminder of the area's inequality.
Yeah, I guess it is a reminder that the people that are paying taxes are paying for subpar social housing.
And that's why I'm in Kensington to ask the people I meet, how do you feel about the level of tax that you pay at the moment?
In my personal opinion, it's complete daylight robbery. Just under a quarter of my paycheck goes straight to the government, and as I say, let's just say I'm around that average income, and that percentage is only going to go up throughout my career. Ideally, it would never go above 10%, because guess what? Then I can spend more of the money, and you can get the money out of VAT instead.
It hurts, but I can afford it.
In other words, he thinks it's high, but not too high.
Being a bit of a communist, I guess. Sorry, I'm not. But, you know, I do believe everyone should pay tax.
I don't know what she means by that. I'm not a swivel-eyed libertarian to the point that I say that taxation is theft and shouldn't exist. Though on a very absolutist level, I do find it hard to argue against. But there is a point where it obviously becomes too high, and the reason that these rich people are saying, well, everyone should pay tax, is because they don't want to say, yeah, I do feel that it is a bit ridiculous. And frankly, I don't think they want to admit that they probably exploit some tax loopholes.
How would you feel about a tax on wealth rather than income?
As already mentioned, that is simply an unworkable idea anyway.
Wealth, more often than not, is a result of people's savings and their hope to exist on their savings. It just seems wrong to take that away from them.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. Again, your savings, if you are smart, are in an ISA. They're in stocks and shares. They're not just sitting in a current account or under the bed in terms of cash. And yes, a lot of people keep them in that for emergency funds or to save up for whatever the hell they want to spend it on. And again, as this guy said at the beginning, it's money that's already been earned and taxed. It is just pure envy, this whole wealth tax thing. They already pay a substantial amount of the tax share. As you can see from these two graphs from the IFS, in terms of how much the taxpayers' incomes are, the bottom 50% has an income of about 24% of all income in the UK. And they're only paying about not even 10% of all income tax. And then you've got the middle class, which is taking up another 50% of it, and they're paying yet another 40% of the income tax. And then you get to the top 10 and 1%, they're paying over 60% in total of all tax revenue when it comes to income. In terms of wealth distribution, I think this would even make socialist countries from the 20th century jealous. So the focus on, oh, just tax the rich more and more and more, it's not going to get you anywhere. Well done, you might scrape a bit more out to fund the NHS for another 10 days. Who cares? I'd rather encourage them to come to Britain and invest their own money in Britain to then make money from it, because how do you make money? You offer products and services that people actually want to buy. And then you can just bypass all this taxation to provide people tower blocks that end up just burning down anyway.
Well, like, for example, like the tax on, like, there's going to be a tax on £80,000 and more, which is, for London, with how high rent is at the moment, I think it's like that's like, I mean, not livable, but like it's you know, it's not a lot of money, and to tax that proportion as well is unfair. I think they should start with all the ultra rich first, and then just go down from there.
I can't find any information on the £80,000 tax bracket coming in. I believe that tax bracket was something put forward by Jeremy Corbyn's Labour, and I believe when you actually looked into it, the reason that they chose that particular number to use as a tax bracket is because at the time, the MP's salary was £78,000 or something like that. So it would affect everyone else, but not Jeremy Corbyn and his bunch of socialists. But again, yeah, the ultra-rich, quote-unquote, they're already being taxed up to the eyeballs. And in terms of income tax, yeah, they're making up nearly 70% of the share of income tax. I think it's fair to say that they are doing their bit.
Yeah, it's quite high considering like the amenities don't really represent what I'm paying in tax. Like I wish that with the amount of tax that I'm paying, I'm not really seeing it being put into what I would expect to get back from it.
Which is one of my biggest reasons for just making everything private anyway. I don't like what the government is giving me, but I am forced to pay this tax to pay for subpar services, whether that be the police, the fire. Fire's pretty good, actually. The NHS is the greatest social care failure known to man, and yet apparently it's the envy of the world. Education isn't going too well either, and yet we're forced to pay for all this, and not only for ourselves but for other people. And a lot of people, I think if it came down to voluntarily paying this sort of thing anyway, they would pay for that. In fact, we have direct evidence of that with friendly societies back before the NHS became a thing and completely destroyed them. They'd effectively work on the neighbourhood level, and you'd have organisers saying, look, we'll put a big pot together, and then that's effectively your insurance to cover things for, you know, your hospital bills and things like that. We'll make sure you only have good doctors for it because we don't want bad ones. We want to not waste this money because we only have a finite amount of it. And then from there, you saw health outcomes becoming a lot better. And then the NHS comes in and it ruins it all. So yeah, I don't think a lot of people are the greedy super rich type like people say. In fact, a lot of them end up becoming philanthropists anyway. And you probably would see much better results if we had more encouragement for philanthropy. But what ends up happening is that they get taxed up to the eyeballs in the first place. Then if they do the philanthropy, they get taxed up to the eyeballs again. And so what's the incentive for doing that? You're paying twice in that case for something that the government should be doing anyway. This is why when Rashford was doing his philanthropy work to feed kids, he was having a massive go at the government because they were taking his money so much that of course he thinks it should be their job to do it for him. And really, they should just say, oh, okay, you can keep doing it and we'll make it completely tax-free, and, you know, you get statues put up in Manchester for feeding kids. That is how the world should work. It worked pretty well throughout Britain before we decided after World War II that we basically just needed complete socialism / Keynesianism.
Is that in terms of like public services and stuff?
Yeah, public services. Like, yeah, we do have, there's good transport systems in London, but like that's about as far as it goes. I think the public services are actually quite expensive for the amount of tax that we are paying. Like I think like to try and go to Manchester could cost like £60, which I think is insane.
I mean, yeah, transport in London is some of the best in the world as far as I've experienced. You don't even need Oyster cards at this point. Everything can just be done through your debit card. And public transport is so interconnected, I've not really had trouble at all ever travelling through London on public transport. But yes, I do agree, trains are somewhat expensive. I mean, this guy's saying 60 quid to get to Manchester from London. That's off peak. On peak times, it's typically about £250. And that is all down to the government. You can blame privatisation all you want, but the fact of the matter is that it's the government that sets the prices, and it is the government that runs the railways, thanks to National Rail. So yeah, what's the point of paying for National Rail through taxes when we end up having to pay substantially more than anywhere else in the world for our railways?
Back home in Ireland, that's like €5 to get from like 3-hour train journey.
I can only imagine this is some type of rail card because I'm finding trains that are 2.5 hours from Dublin to Cork, and while they are much, much cheaper than British trains, don't get me wrong, they are still costing a good €30 odd. So yes, they're certainly cheaper, but I don't know where he's got €5 from. I can only imagine that's with rail cards.
Would you describe yourself as wealthy?
Pardon?
Would you describe yourself as wealthy?
Oh, no. No.
Without any details, I can't say whether he is wealthy or not. However, I will say that given that everyone is a protagonist in their own story, and a lot of people in Britain like to see themselves as the underdog, you will very rarely see anyone describe themselves as wealthy. So yes, I'm with you, Politics Joe, this guy probably is in denial about being wealthy, but even if he is, I don't really care.
I have 2 homes. Yeah, I would say I've got a very good standard of living, but I'm still very happy to help those less fortunate.
Yeah, I think having 2 houses, you could be considered rich or wealthy by those standards. But also she is quite clear that she is more than happy to give to charity and to have tax money quite deliberately be used to help the more vulnerable, less fortunate, whatever you want to call them. But that's kind of my problem with this whole thing. I am fine with giving to charities that help out the homeless and less fortunate, but when it comes to the government, I think that they're incentivised to not really deal with the problem properly, and a lot of the civil service really do misunderstand the actual problems, and we see this all the time. The greatest example was Norway's experiment to give every homeless person a flat. It just turned out that in 2 weeks, a vast number of these homeless people would not stay in the flat. They'd just be out in the streets again. So clearly the issue is a bit deeper than wealth redistribution. I'd probably go as far as to say in the Western world, wealth redistribution really isn't the answer anymore.
You know, you see people on the street. It's dreadful to see. And what do? What did the government do?
Well, typically they do give support to homeless shelters. They do as well fund homeless shelters themselves. It's something like 1/5 of London's homes are social houses, and then, of course, of that, just under half of them are being given to people who are foreign born. But the incentives for being in social housing don't seem to be, please try and get on your own 2 feet in the private market as quickly as possible. It just seems a never-ending, yeah, you can stay here forever, as long as you actually need it. Well, it's not really incentivising people to move out and stand on their own 2 feet, is it? In other words, to be more productive.
They encourage people, migrants, to come in, give them free accommodation. Why don't they look after their own people, the old age pensioners?
I mean, yeah, that's a pretty fair point. I think a lot of people who are paying a large amount of tax who are British would be saying, please can you look after the British first? We are not here for a worldwide charity.
Is there a world in which the government can do both those things?
You know what I say about the government? They look after number one.
I don't even think the government are particularly good at doing that anymore. Pretty much every scandal has been front and foremost with the government for the past 10 years. They can't get away with anything. So looking after quote-unquote number one just doesn't work anymore. The problem is that people really don't seem to want Corbyn's socialism, and they certainly don't want to be a place where people from all over the world can just come over on a boat and stay here and even be subsidised by the taxpayer. So when it comes down to it, I don't think the government are looking after number one. I just think they're so incompetent, and we've been led to a place thanks to Tony Blair where you literally can't do anything from Parliament without having the political will to completely gut the entire system and reform it from the ground up. That since no one has that political will or the competence to do it, you've just ended up with a perpetual cycle of just giving this money to places where, frankly, it shouldn't be going.
What is wealthy in your eyes?
I suppose somebody who is worth at least £500,000–600,000.
I mean, I don't particularly have an issue with that. I just don't think this guy realises that if he does own a house, then he should be considering himself wealthy, especially if it's a house in London. Some of my friends recently bought a house in London, and it is what you could consider quite minimal. 1 bedroom, tiny garden, and it's worth over £500,000. Now, according to the bank, that means that over a period of 20 to 30 years, they think that this couple, who are my friends, are going to be worth over £500,000. Now, are these two wealthy? No, I wouldn't consider them wealthy, but I would say that when they do get to the ripe old age of 50, they definitely will be. And frankly, they've earned it. However, this is just to make the point that house prices are ridiculously high, and living in London alone and owning a house in London alone, that would consider you wealthy. And I don't buy that everyone who owns a house in London should be considered wealthy. And this elderly person's analysis would actually probably agree. However, this guy's probably thinking that houses still only cost tens of thousands of pounds rather than costing £500,000. So I can see where he's coming from, but Politics Joe is going to try and play this off as, oh well, then this person thinks that every OAP who owns his own or her own house should be giving more in tax than they currently are, which I don't think an awful lot of people would agree with.
Tax on wealth. I think insane wealth is ridiculous.
Yep, you're very cool. Yep, you're showing your left-wing credentials there. That's very good.
Like someone who has like over £1 billion, like that's just like, that's why would you need that amount of money?
Because they don't have that amount of money. They have that amount in worth of assets. They own a couple of homes, probably mansions. They own a lot of stock in FTSE 500 companies. They probably own companies that are worth that much. A lot of entrepreneurs, they live in relatively stable households that are worth middling when it comes to the housing market. But then what they end up doing is they end up being worth that much because they end up making businesses that end up growing and growing and growing and making millions of pounds, which they will eventually just sell off to other big companies. That tends to happen a lot of the time when you make a successful small business. But then they don't just get that money from this company and put it in a bank vault and leave it there to be invested by the bank. No, what they do is, again, they invest it in stocks and shares. They put it into assets. They put it into things that are going to appreciate in value. So when you say who needs that amount of money, the answer is absolutely nobody. That's not what being a millionaire or billionaire means. And this is why wealth taxes make absolutely no sense, because essentially all the government will be doing is seizing assets. And as soon as you start doing that, you're 2 steps away from full-blown communism and gulags, and literally stopping people from leaving the country.
I think if you've worked hard, then I think there should be like inheritance tax could be, if you have like ridiculously sized houses, but I think it's all proportionate in a sense.
I thought the answers from the young people are so wishy-washy. If you've earned your money, I don't think you should be taxed on it, but if you've got a ridiculous amount of inheritance coming your way, then yes, that should be taxed. Despite the fact that, yet again, I'm going to repeat myself, inheritance money has already been taxed on. The government has got their share from it. Why should they get another share?
I don't know, I think insane wealth should be taxed more, but, there's always that old analogy of the guy buying 10 pints for everyone else. So they're just going to go to another country, perhaps. There's so much offshore tax nowadays that you never know where it's going to go anyway.
Yes, this is exactly why I think taxation is the complete wrong way to go for these things, because it does just make people want to go to tax havens. Make yourself a tax haven, and you will see absolutely everything in your country improve. I would love for these people to tell me of one single poor tax haven. I'd just love to hear about one.
As somebody that's not well off, I think the wealthy should pay their fair share, but it's getting the balance right. If you ask for too much, they just go elsewhere.
Again, I don't think most people realise how much the quote-unquote super rich already pay in tax. They are clearly paying their fair share. I don't know how much fairer you can get than almost 70% of income tax payment share, and if you put that up to the top 10%, it's over 60%. How much more do you need to take off them for it to be considered fair? I need a tangible number.
If we tax like the top 1%, it would like trickle down to everyone else in a more suitable way. I don't think like the bottom percentage of people should be taxed.
Amazingly, this is called Extreme Britain, and I think the most telling part of all this is that effectively everyone is for the tax system we already have. I am just for a global, let's lower all of the tax bands please, or raise the personal allowance, whereas everyone else seems to just want all taxes for everyone who's already paying tax to go up, because obviously only the highest paid people are paying a lot of it. Whereas again, I'm around median income for the UK, and I'm paying the government a quarter, not quite a quarter, of my paycheck. And later in the year, when hopefully I get a raise, I'm going to pay even more to the government. It's not going to be enough, obviously, to reach the next tax band, but as my money goes up and up and up, my income goes up, then obviously the percentage I am taxed goes up. And I'm not happy about that because I don't feel like it's worth it.
Our income, you choose to work, you work hard, you pay tax. And tax on income in this country, I think, is reasonably fair.
I'd argue it's only reasonably fair insofar as the more you are earning, the more you are paying in tax. However, as I say, I think the line just goes up and up and up way too much when you start getting especially beyond £100,000. And when that starts to be the case, the only thing that ends up happening is that those earning that much start finding tax loopholes by being paid in company benefits. I know some business owners that end up putting their wives on the payroll simply to have to pay less tax overall because you're taxed an individual, not as a couple, but that's another thing I would change. But all I'm getting from this quote-unquote extreme Britain is that everyone seems to not have too many complaints about the tax system. When they actually describe their ideal tax system, it's the one we have. When they start complaining about the super rich, then they're just getting silly. In fact, not many of them are even getting that silly. They're just saying, yeah, those are the super rich, it's ridiculous, they should pay more tax. But then they understand that if you overtax them, they'll move. So actually, no, they do understand the issues quite well from the looks of it.
I think the argument against that is people on lower earnings pay proportionally more tax than someone on a very high income with very high wealth.
Again, the main reason for that is because much more rich people can afford accountants that can help them find loopholes to keep more of their earned money. But again, the graph again, top 10% paying over 60% of all income tax. I don't understand what more politics Joe want. They don't seem to realise that if you end up paying more as a proportion of your tax, you'll end up just wanting to have lower pay. It's what a lot of people do when they're around the 100,000 tax bracket, because you end up losing on your child benefits over £100,000. So you'd end up just being better off on £99,000 until you end up getting over £120,000 because of the child benefits, and that's obviously only if you've got kids. Which is why you should just have a flat tax rate anyway, so then you don't even have to think about anything like this, and you don't then have accountants coming in, making a load of money, effectively having to solve a problem that the government enforced on everyone.
I'm afraid the use of the term proportionately can be very misleading. Proportionate to what?
I know this guy's elderly and clearly his mental faculties are starting to deteriorate slightly, but it is pretty obvious that when it comes to proportion, they mean a proportion of their income. But he is right that you need to be careful when you're talking statistics with people, because they're very, very easy to mess about with.
However, people who are on low incomes, they have to be on very low income where they get considerable benefits. And people on low incomes don't pay tax. So I don't think people on low incomes have a great deal to complain about.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I'm pretty much in the same boat on that. Benefits really should be there for people who have found themselves on the social safety net. They've run into a really bad time through something that wasn't necessarily their fault, and they just need help before they can get back on their feet. That should be the ideal world that benefits are used for. However, it is true that if you are on minimum wage, you shouldn't be making enough to pay tax. I don't think I started paying tax until I started working full-time. When I was doing part-time hours at a supermarket and part-time internship, I'm pretty sure I wasn't paying tax. And on that end, I really didn't have a lot to complain about. It's one of the main reasons I am absolutely against minimum wage, but that's for another topic. But when it comes to it, you can be getting benefits when you are on a low income, and you certainly aren't paying tax, or certainly that much tax, when you are on a low income. I know this because I've been on low incomes.
I'm not happy.
Why aren't you happy?
Because how I put it, they keep taking from me, giving to the wealthier people, and it's not fair.
I'd love to know what he means by that, because when a lot of people are saying this, they usually cite government contracts that are given out. And don't get me wrong, there can be nepotism and corruption with regard to that, but an awful lot of the time, when it comes to living in a realistic world, the problem really isn't that big. Should we have none of it? Yes, that would be an ideal world. Are we ever going to get none of it? No. Should we live in a world where you can be constantly checked on when you're in government, making sure that the money isn't all being funneled into these projects that go nowhere? Yes, absolutely. But generally, when it comes to government contracts, even if there is some corruption going on, usually it is to provide services that, to be quite frank with you, are just as good, if not slightly better, than the directly government-controlled and run ones. So again, that money is going to quote-unquote wealthy people to help run a public service. They're not just going there for free.
I have a family I need to feed, and the more work I do, the more tax I get to pay, and cost of living is going up.
I mean, yes, as your income goes up, i.e. the more you work, yes, the more you will pay in tax. I know, being taxed is very, very, very annoying, but again, as the guy before said, as a proportion, you're not really being taxed that much if you're on a low income. I've only just got to middling and it's a quarter of my paycheck. So if you are on a low income, I know for a fact you are paying less than a quarter of your income.
Pay rise doesn't really affect private sector that much, except you're working in the government sector and I work in the private sector, so...
Well, yeah, in the private sector, you're supposed to negotiate your own pay. If you're in the public sector, you have to unionise to actually negotiate with the government for a pay rise. Like, that just makes sense. You can literally just go up to your boss and say, I think I earn more, and then go into negotiations for it. You can do that in the private sector. And if you think you're being underpaid, move job.
How many penny they put in the pay rise does not really help me. So the tax I'm paying is really taking more out of my pocket.
This man simply just doesn't seem to understand that when the public sector get a pay rise, that isn't affecting the whole of the public sector. That's just affecting certain areas of the public sector. Say, you know, the junior doctors are currently asking for a wage rise. When they get a wage rise, it's not going to be the whole of the NHS and every worker within there getting a pay rise. It's just going to be junior doctors. It's a bit like working at Asda or something like that and then complaining that the warehouse workers are getting a pay rise while you're not. Well, of course you're not in general. The general rise was just for the warehouse workers. And this man is simply trying to make the same argument, but for public versus private sector payments. As if the public sector gets a flat-out pay rise for everyone who works for the government, which just isn't the case.
And then how do you feel about the kind of the public services that you're getting in exchange for your tax at the moment?
I'm not really happy. Again, I would say I'm not really happy because
You are being subsidised by public services. This man has told us that he is on a low income. His public service is being subsidised by the very rich, and he is still saying that he's not happy with it. Well, yes, okay, you are paying for them, but in terms of proportion for the amount you're paying for it, the lower incomes are barely even covering 10% of income tax revenue, so I don't know what you would expect.
the waiting line in NHS is something to behold. My daughter is supposed to be seen by specialists, and they're telling me it's going to take about 2 years.
Remember, the NHS is the envy of the world. But yes, absolutely everybody seems to either have their own NHS horror story or know someone close to them with an NHS horror story. Its days are numbered, but it's going to be one of the last things that succumbs to reform in the UK, because for some reason everyone seems to think it's the best healthcare system in the world.
Say I'm not expecting her to be seen until she's probably 10, and it's affecting her education.
I just want to point out at this point, you can tell from the man's accent, he was not born in Britain. This is a foreign-born man, and I'd wager, I can't say for certain, but I'd wager he has not got British citizenship. And so this just begs the question, why are you getting free healthcare and education? And I don't even know if you live in a council house, but I'm not going to go that far, because I don't need to go that far. He's getting free healthcare and education, despite being on a low income. Again, this is why we have so much part of the reason we have so much immigration within the UK. It's because we are completely subsidising people coming over here to become low income people that are subsidised, quite frankly, by the rich and middle income people who are mostly going to be native born Brits. So it is quite annoying to see a foreign born man on this particular Vox Pop saying, oh, I'm not getting the public services that I really need, despite the fact that when it comes to it, I'm being subsidised by the government to live here in the first place, and now I'm going to complain about the fact that I have to wait for my daughter to be reviewed by specialists and that she isn't doing as well as she should be in school. Again, this is all free. This is kind of a beggars can't be choosers type scenario. Yet Politics Joe, despite this is being called Extreme Britain, is trying to make out that this isn't just a crazy situation, that we have a foreign-born man here who is being completely subsidised by the taxpayer, and then has the audacity to complain that his free services aren't very good. Anyway, the next couple are asked where they'd like to see the wealth tax money spent by the government.
Looking after those in need. And I'm just thinking as well, like people do spend their money. Oh, I'm going to sound awful here. Sorry. Maybe we should tax frivolous things that people don't really need.
No, that doesn't sound awful at all. That's actually one of the most reasonable taxes we have. It's called value-added tax. Whenever you buy anything in a shop that is a luxury good, which is basically anything that isn't food, kids' clothes, heating, shelter, i.e. housing, or water, then what happens is that 20% of that money you spend on that good or service goes straight to the government as value-added tax. That's a fifth of the price. So when she says, oh, we should tax people for spending money on things that they don't really need, that's already done. And then you get to fuel levies, which something like 70 to 80% of the price of fuel is all tax. Then there's extra taxes that go on to smoking and alcohol. Like, again, all of these are really reasonable things to actually want. That's what this woman is saying. I want reasonable taxation policy. And it's stuff we already have that, quite frankly, is way too high. Again, something that people that want more tax and never really seem to get their head around is that if people are spending less on income tax and tax on sales and things like that, they'd actually have more disposable income to then actually spend on more things that will get the tax revenue anyway. You probably won't lose anything or very much if you actually reduce income tax. In fact, people will probably put their money into savings more, whether that be in ISA or stocks and shares, and then guess what? Investment in the UK goes up. Guess what? That generally means more jobs and expanding economy. But swivel-eyed loons who love to tax the rich more don't seem to ever understand that.
And have the basics that keep people alive and healthy.
What are those frivolous things?
Well, like the newest TV or something. And
yeah, basic luxury items. Again, your TV probably has a 20% VAT on it. In fact, I guarantee it does, because there is no way on earth that a TV can be counted as an essential good.
It's like designer labels on it, designer clothes? I know they're expensive anyway.
Yes, and they already have VAT on.
But maybe there should be a heavier tax on that. And
The whole reason I reckon that this woman is going on about new TVs and new designer clothes is because typically they are the type of things that wealthy people would spend their money on first. Because a huge entertainment system and the women buying designer labels, that is typically what people do, yes. And that's why she's going for it first, because the wealthy are more likely to buy that sort of thing. But again, I don't see the issue with keeping it at the 20% tax rate and then letting these people have more of their disposable income, and then guess what? They'll probably spend it more, invest it more. Again, growing the economy. Sending it straight to the government, it seems to be completely wasted. In fact, here is a graph of public productivity. As you can see, it has effectively flatlined since 1997, going down slightly due to the pandemic. We have seen absolutely no productivity improvement within the public sector since Tony Blair came into office, and there has been absolutely no incentive to improve that, to make public money become more efficient, essentially. Now let's quickly compare that with productivity in the UK market sector. Oh, look at that. 1997 Q1 as a baseline for productivity. It has gone up to 160 odd percent, nearly 170%. Almost a 70% improvement over 26 years, while the public sector has improved in no way whatsoever. And the blips you can see here, 2008 crash and the COVID pandemic, oh look, they recover within the COVID pandemic 2 years, and the 2008 crash, it took more like 5 years. Because the private sector is constantly incentivized to use their money efficiently. And yet what all these people saying tax the rich and all that are saying is that I would rather have that money wasted just so the rich can't use it than actually have a functioning, growing economy, because all that is running people's lives at the moment is a basic sense of envy.
maybe less tax on fruit and vegetables to keep everyone healthy.
Fruit and veg does not have any VAT on it. It is not a luxury good. It is a foodstuff. Some foodstuffs are taxed. Cakes aren't, biscuits are. But when it comes to fruit and vegetables, they are not taxed. I don't know why this woman doesn't know that. But again, it is just completely making my point that everyone in this quote-unquote extreme Britain Vox Pop series is completely sensible. And in this particular episode, they are being completely sensible, and we already have the system they want.
Do you think the government understands what life is like for people like you?
No, they're out of touch. Absolutely out of touch.
Go on then. The government are out of touch of everyone, by the way. The public sector is this entirely, totally self-contained bubble that is just fed information from the media and academia. And so, genuinely, most civil servants I know don't understand how the world works. It's incredible.
Because if they are not out of touch, a prime minister who is from an immigrant background would say we'll tax the immigrant nation to be able to fund the NHS. That doesn't make any sense.
Just to make that clear, he is saying that because the Prime Minister is from an immigrant background, he should be understanding in that we are now a nation of immigrants, which grim, but also then therefore that the NHS should be free for immigrants and should basically be there for immigrants. Well, it's supposed to be charitable to him. He probably does mean for everyone, but the problem is these public sectors, because they haven't improved in productivity in the way the private sector has, they can't handle the massive influx of immigrants that have come in. If you had better productivity and better allocation of funds, it probably wouldn't actually be that bad, but it's in the inevitability of what is going to happen to a public sector, because the incentives are all there to just keep it as it is. Robert Conquest's law of power. Absolutely everyone is conservative about what they know best, and all the civil servants know best is their own departments, and so they have no reason to try and improve productivity because they don't know any better and they're not incentivized to improve it.
Because these people are struggling to feed, to survive, and these are the same people you want to tax to fund the NHS. Meanwhile, the rich keep getting richer.
Yes, but not many people are particularly getting rich off government contracts. Luckily in the UK, it is still worth being in the private sector if you want to become very rich. It just tends to be when that happens, you then start lobbying the government to keep your economic power there, to reduce the free market index of the UK, and to effectively make creating a business unaffordable through minimum wages, through business taxes, through effectively outpricing them via government laws and taxation.
If it is not for the whole crisis that happened, we got to know about his wife's tax status. That would have been swept under the rug. The same thing for him. It would have been swept under the rug. So they keep getting richer. They keep giving themselves the contract to feed their pocket, and then they tax us. So, no.
I'm going to try and translate what he just said. I think he started going on about Rishi Sunak's wife's non-dom status, which does indeed mean that she was taxed at a lower rate. But then he starts going on about the rich getting richer, and tax evasion isn't money being funneled to the rich by the government. It is rich people keeping their own money that they have earned via completely legal means, by the way. But again, that just sounds like pure envy. Oh, this is an immigrant success story. Why can't he give me more of his money to be as successful as him, when in reality Rishi Sunak and his wife got rich via actually working hard and being productive? So I don't know what else to say to that guy. Anyway, that was everything for that episode of Reacting to Extreme Britain. As you can see, really the only extremist in that whole video was the African man who decided to say that basically the whole of the UK should keep subsidising his life and actually improve the services specifically for him. Everyone else literally talked about a tax system that we already have. So I don't know what they were expecting from Extreme Britain in this case, but as you can see, Britain is extreme in the case that our current tax system is pretty extreme when it comes to taxing the rich. But anyway, that's everything I had for you today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.